There was starvation, drought, cannibalism. Lots of very pleasant things were happening. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I have 4 books that I want to talk about that I accidentally read in a chronological sequence, even though they have nothing in common. I just happened to read them in order of the time and place that they are set in. So the first book takes place in the 1500s. It's historical fiction. The second book takes place in the 1950s. It's a postmodern novel. The third book takes place in the 2020s, the current contemporary time period. And the last book is set in the far/near future of 2100. It's interesting to see how some stories are really timeless and could take place anywhere, anytime, whereas others really are inextricably linked with the time and place that they're set in. I'd be curious to hear, what was the last book you read that felt like it could only have been written in that time period and it couldn't have taken place anywhere else? That story had to be told in the 1970s, or it had to be told in the 80s. Let me know. Let me know in the comments down below. First book I want to talk about is The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. This book takes place in the 1600s, and the sort of inciting incident of this book, a young girl decides to escape the colonial settlement that she's living in Jamestown, Virginia, and just strike out on her own. You have to imagine, how terrible must it have been in that colonial settlement for her to decide that I'm leaving civilization behind. It is quite literally better for me to survive in the wilderness and try to eke out some kind of living in the vast forest of North America instead of staying with my fellow humans. How terrible did it have to be? That is what this book is asking. If you think about the historical time period that this book takes place in, 1609 was referred to as the starving time that winter. There were 500 pilgrims that arrived at the Jamestown settlement in Virginia. By 1610 spring, only 60 of those pilgrims would be alive. So it was pretty terrible. There was starvation, drought, cannibalism, lots of very pleasant things were happening. I haven't read a lot of books that take place during that time period, to be honest, and it was just incredibly written. Lauren Groff's language is beautiful, and I would not be surprised if she won a Pulitzer sooner rather than later, because her writing is just so evocative. Like, I could feel every physical sensation that this main character goes through. She's running through the forest. That is literally the plot of this book, is the main character running through the forest and having these flashbacks to her time, both in the settlement, but as well before that, her life in London, where she comes from. Really interesting to see the imagery of London as this very dirty, crowded, like terrible place, contrasted with the imagery of the wilderness of North America. I really love how this book explores not just women, but, you know, other marginalized people in history. That's not what this book is about. I hate describing it that way, but how do I say this? I think that this book does a fantastic job of exploring the life of someone who we don't normally think of. The main character of this book is a servant girl. I guess I never had any conception of what life would be like for someone who comes to North America against their will. I don't want to give away too much about the main character and her backstory, because really that's part of the mystery and intrigue of this book, is as she's running through the forest and having these very physically intense trials, you get to learn more about her through these flashbacks. And as you learn more about her and her place in the world, it's just so fascinating. I love how Groff describes her writing process of writing historical fiction as this sort of back and forth dialogue between the current world and history. So like she's aware as a writer that she's writing this in, you know, modern times, and how that this book has to be, because of that, a conversation between now and then. How to balance that without making it feel like anachronistic in a way, like how to make sure that it's a book that feels urgent and of the now, with also holding that it is a historical book. I hope that makes sense. This was an incredible book, and I highly, highly recommend it. I think it's a great starting point for Lauren Groff, actually. I've only read 2 books, so I'm not an expert. And actually, this is the second book in a triptych that Groff is writing, so it's not a series, but it's going to be 3 books that are all related. And the first book, Matrix, is about Catholicism and nuns, and it depicts this almost utopian society of women in the 12th century. And then this book is in the 15th century, and it deals with Protestantism and Puritans in North America. And the final book, which has yet to come out, is going to be taking place in the modern world, and it's also going to be about religion. And in each book, in Matrix and The Vaster Wilds, Groff explores the relationship between the individual and God, and it explores how that faith looks like and evolves over time in very, very interesting ways. Again, I don't want to give too much away because there's actually like a really interesting mystery at the center of The Vaster Wilds, and it's just such a compulsive book. It's a very short book as well, and it's, just a survival story. I find survival stories inherently compelling because you just want to know, does this character survive? Are they able to, with their wits and, human intelligence, are they able to eke out a living in the wilderness? I find that question really interesting, and this book is spiritual, it's physically intense, it's just beautiful. I highly recommend it. Please read this. The next book I'm not as positive on, and it really was a disappointment because The Magus is the kind of book that I feel like I normally gravitate towards and enjoy intensely. It's told in the first person, and it's about this young man called Nicholas Earth. He arrives on this Greek island, and he's there to teach English, and then he becomes embroiled with this very rich and mysterious Greek millionaire while he's on the island. The book actually does not start with him arriving on the island, and I think that is one of its major faults in general. Like, I think this book is very long, and it could have been half the size and still had the same impact, and maybe would have had more of an impact on me if it had been half the size. But anyways, the book starts several months before Nicholas arrives on this island and details this relationship he's having with a girl. And in general, Nicholas is just a very disillusioned young man. This book takes place in the 1950s, and he is a veteran of World War II. He's lost his parents, and he is, a very lonely character and very repressed. And the book is aware of this. The narrative is aware of this. Other characters, like one of the women he's involved with, tells him, like, you're a very selfish and cold-hearted person. And the book is cognizant of this. Nicholas Earth almost feels like a Haruki Murakami main character. And I want to say that even though I personally didn't enjoy this book, I think that I could see someone else really loving it. In fact, I know that other people adore this book. It's incredibly well reviewed, and people, it shows up on people's best 100 novels of all time list all the time, which is frustrating for me personally. Like, I really tried to give this a fair shot, and I finished it till the end. I almost DNF'd it several times, but I really went through the whole book and finished it, and I still found it somewhat disappointing. As much as I appreciate Nicholas's character as this disillusioned young man, and it's the 1950s, postmodernism, all of that, it's just kind of boring. The interiority of Nicholas is actually not that deep. Like, I think a lot of other novels that are similar to this go more in depth to the psychology of the main character, and I would compare this to like a Donna Tartt book, like The Secret History. Richard Papin is a very similar character to Nicholas Earth, but The Secret History works in a large part because it has such a large ensemble cast. And so you have all these other characters who are equally as unlikable as Richard, but because it's a larger cast, there is so much more going on, and there's a lot more interesting things happening. In this book, it's really just Richard and the millionaire, and there's a third character who comes into play, and there's some other stuff going on, but it's really just about Nicholas, and Nicholas is unfortunately not that interesting, to me at least. I could see someone else reading this and loving it, but something this book does that reminds me of Twin Peaks is there are these things that happen that are supernatural while he's on the island. There's always that question of, is what happening, is it actually supernatural, or is this some sort of game or some sort of production that's happening? In Twin Peaks, I think that's done really well. And again, Twin Peaks has an ensemble cast. So the scenes of these weird things happening and is it real or is it not, it stays very fresh because it's always happening in a different way. In this book, it's always the same thing. And I don't want to give away too much, but I feel like it started to get very repetitive and the conversations would go in circles. And I was just like, I see what you're doing, but we've done it so many times. Like, can we get to the point now? I feel like people who are into psychology and Lacan and psychoanalysis and Freud, like those kinds of people, you would like this more than I do. I'm a little ignorant when it comes to like the ins and outs of Freud and Lacan, so I might not be the best person to have read this, and I would be willing to give John Fowles another try. Like, similar to Murakami, I just recognize that I am not the target demographic of a book about a disillusioned young man as a young woman who is not disillusioned. I'm sort of like the opposite of what this book is going for. So maybe that was it. Maybe it's just because I just don't get it. I don't know. I would give John Fowles another try. I might try, I know The Maggot and The French Lieutenant's Woman that's listed on here is very good. Maybe it's also that it's a horror novel and I'm not a big horror reader. That could also be it. The third book I want to talk about is a novella by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I picked up because of Nico's book reviews. He talks about this in his review of The Magician's Trilogy by Lev Grossman, and it's called And Put Away the Childish Things. It takes place in the 2020s, and I found it really interesting how the pandemic is part of the plot. It's just like kind of crazy to think about how the pandemic moving forward, authors are going to have to write that in to their books if they want to set a book in the 2020s. Weird to have lived through such a huge moment in history. Basically about this guy named Harry. He's in his 30s and he's a TV personality. He's again sort of disillusioned and cynical, needs money, and is doing all these different things that he doesn't find particularly fulfilling, but finds out that he's part of this magical lineage, goes to this secondary world. It is definitely a deconstruction of Narnia. I just read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so I have a lot of appreciation for this book because I think it answers one central question that I had while reading Narnia. Why don't the animals in Narnia harbor any kind of resentment for Aslan or the children, the Pevensies? Why are they so just like accepting of their place in the world? Why don't they question why Aslan never came and helped them out before the children arrived in Narnia? Like, why the logic of the world? Why are they so complacent and okay with being persecuted by the White Witch? And like that question, I had that while reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And this novella by Adrian Tchaikovsky really deals with and grapples with that question in an interesting way. It's a good novella. I really enjoyed it. The feeling I kept getting while reading it was like watching a really good episode of Doctor Who where it's this contained story, very British and dry. I did the audiobook for this and Adrian Tchaikovsky is the narrator, and maybe that's why. I thought it was just a really great little novella exploring an interesting concept, and it was my first Adrian Tchaikovsky book, so I don't know if that was a particularly good place to start, but I really liked it, so I'm glad I read it. Definitely having read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe made me appreciate it more for what it was doing as a response to Narnia. The last book I want to talk about is Mockingbird by Walter Tevis. This is a sci-fi novel from the 80s, and it deals with a world where robots have basically not taken over, but robots can basically do all the jobs that a human can. And so humans no longer have to work. And it's this really interesting setting of New York where humans don't have to work anymore, but because of that, no one really knows how to fix robots or fix things when things go wrong. And it's this world that is post-scarcity, but also decaying in a way, and no one really knows how to stop it. People have stopped giving birth. Everyone is infertile. and drugs are widely available. And it's just a really fascinating portrait of the future, especially given that it was written in the 80s. It just feels very prescient. And this is a frustration I have with myself when it comes to sci-fi, where I'm unable to look at sci-fi without thinking of how good it is at predicting the future. And maybe that's just because I don't read a lot of sci-fi. So when I do read science fiction, I'm just sort of looking at it as, how relevant is this? Which is not always the most interesting question, if that makes sense. I will say that Mockingbird succeeds in painting a portrait of the future that I think could happen. And we are very much on that path. One of the things that is included in this book is this idea of individuality to an extreme. And I think that is definitely happening in our modern society when we look at social media and algorithmic social media. Something that I've seen people start to talk about is how algorithms are very individual. People, when they watch television, it's like this thing that you watch that the whole family watches. Whereas like when you're on your phone, it's like you're looking down and it's the small screen, and it's like your relationship to your phone is so insular as opposed to any of our other things. Like, you know, you could say reading a book is insular as well, but it's like the algorithm is tailoring a reality and an experience that is just for you. How will that look like in the future when we are so individualized and, you know, to the point where in Mockingbird there are these rules for privacy. You can't even make eye contact with someone else. That's an invasion of privacy. I know a lot of people read this book as a anti-drug book, but I really read the inclusion of drugs and the soporific effects of drugs to be more of a metaphor for the like consumption of information, how we can get desensitized to violence and horrible things happening all the time. There are 3 points of view in Mockingbird: the robot, a woman named Mary Lou, and Bentley. And I loved all 3 of the points of view. I think some people prefer one or the other, but I personally felt like all 3 added a really interesting perspective to the world. It reminded me of the kind of book that I would read in school because it's just so rich with symbolism and commentary on the modern world. Yeah, it was a great book and I'm glad I read it. Like I said, I don't really read a lot of sci-fi, but maybe I need to start reading more. I just bought Ian M. Banks' Consider Flavas, and I'm excited to read that. Before I leave, I did want to talk about some exciting things that I've been getting into lately. Okay, I realized that I've been flashing my address the whole time, so I'm gonna have to refilm this part. But I just subscribed to the New York Review of Books magazine. I'm trying to get more into literature instead of just genre fiction. I think that being subscribed to the NYRB magazine is just a way for me to branch out and see what other people are talking about and read literary criticism and immerse myself more in the literary world. Support that world. I want people to write really interesting and in-depth articles about books, so I want to support that work. I've been thinking about getting a subscription to the Paris Review and the London Review, but we'll see. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I'm going to do a little bit of an October TBR, because why not? I got these 2 books by Megan Lindholm, and I'm just curious to read these to see how or if there's any sort of proto Realm of the Elderlings things going on. I mean, just by the title of the second book, I'm like, this is giving a very specific vibe. Maybe some of those early seeds of Realm of the Elderlings were planted. In case anyone doesn't know, Megan Lindholm is the same person as Robin Hobb. So yeah, I'm really excited to have these. Of course, it's October, so I had to read some scary books. I got the Ghost Stories of Edith Wharton to keep me company in October and hopefully give me the heebie-jeebies. Edith Wharton is a Massachusetts writer. I don't know if she was born here, but she is definitely like a New England author, so I'm excited to read this. Also this is illustrated. I didn't realize that. Yes, I love an illustrated edition. But yeah, I read Ethan Frome in high school and really liked it. That was a book that had a main character who was really lonely and awful. I love that book. So why didn't I like the Magus? I'm gonna keep asking myself that forever. But yeah, Ghost Stories of Edith Wharton. And finally, I got Windhaven by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle. I've seen a lot of people in more literary circles read My Death by Lisa Tuttle, which is also a NYRB book. So I want to read that at some point, but Jimmy recommended this on Chatting with Nuts, and I was like, you know what, I'll give it a try. So I'm gonna read this as well. Let me know what y'all are reading in October, if you have any spooky reads, or if you're just gonna be continuing on with series that you're already in the middle of. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.